Okay, so we'll start in body type, and then we'll go to, I'm just moving my slides around just to make this a little bit faster. Okay, and then we'll go from body type, and then we'll go into cell science, and then we'll probably go back to body type. So it'll probably end up being super circular. Great. Dun, 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 dun. Here we go. So kitchen, the reason I want to start with this kitchen closed image is like, this is more or less what we do in intermittent fasting, is we start to figure out, like, for our body type, whether we're more ectomorphic, endomorphic, or mesomorphic, like what times should the kitchen be open to us, essentially, and what time should they be closed, and why. And when we're going to go into the why, is like, that's where we're going to go into lysosomes, which are like basically little Agni packets that reside in cells that digest anything that's inefficient within the cell. So I think part of the problem with it, in general, is like, at first people don't like feeling empty. Soon we do like feeling empty. Yogis have a distinct advantage, as they've already done usually enough work to clear ama, or undigested material, out of the subtle channels, that they're like into it. They're more into that feeling. But for a lot of people, like, they never used to let their body get hungry. When we do start to let our body get hungry, we feel like usually the biggest things that people report back is like more time, more energy from just eating a couple times a day. So that's just the overview. The transition part of like being hungry for longer, right? That's real. And we'll get a little into the emotional stuff of like being with the action of your cellular biology, so that you can be in those spaces more and let the body process what it's processing. Okay, so body types. We have our lighter ectomorphic types that disperse energy. We have our intense fiery types that direct energy. And then we have I just want to make sure I'm recording. Yeah, good. And then we have our endomorphic types that store and accumulate energy. Now, I find, it's like, yeah, we have all these three energies in our bodies. We have access to all of this. And it's more of like what you want to turn on is a determinant of your kitchen closed hours. So say you're more of a Kapha type, you're more of an endomorph, right? Meaning your body is going to default in its operating system. It's going to default to storing and accumulating. It's going to go more towards gathering and more towards sedentary nature, because water and earth are very affected by gravity, right? They have weight, and because of weight, they have gravity, and that's natural for the endomorphic type. So the endomorphic type often craves the feeling of flying through the wind, right? Of like growing wings and being able to resist gravity. Like that's like the dream of all dreams. Whereas like the Vata type, the wind type, like dreams of landing, right? And being like a duck floating on the pond and not needing to like fly all around all the time. It craves that, like that grounding and that serenity. The Pitta type craves a little bit of both of those things, like the freedom of losing focus, which is an endomorphic wind type. There's a freedom to losing focus that often Pittas crave, of like, they wish they weren't so focused all the time. They wish they could just like clock out, turn off the workaholism or the intensity of focus, the intensity of practice, and not give a shit for a little while, right? To like turn their give a shitter off would be really nice for a Pitta. So that's access to wind, where they can fly and be free, but then also access to just the deep relaxation and feeling the gravity, because their MO is to resist gravity and just to go towards the sun, to go towards the vision and the light. So when we look at intermittent fasting with these types, if we just break it down to the wind people first. So the wind people, these are our Vata types that are craving more of the opposite elements. What I'm saying in terms of like a good intermittent fasting rhythm for a mature adult, right? And a mature adult, I mean, I would say like, I'd be really curious right now with the millennials, I'm just curious of like, what would come up with this rhythm. The hard part of this actually, a lot of this is not that hard for for Vata, because Vata doesn't have as much hunger in general. And so it's more for Vata just getting used to eating in rhythm. And one of the biggest things is to have the main meal or the main caloric intake, around the middle of the day, sometime between, preferably sometime between 10 and 2, just so that they advantage their digestive fire, which is already not the strongest, right? Not the strongest thing, that when they have their eating windows, that it's in the middle of the day. Now, that can be really challenging for Vatas who tend to be sporadic, and they tend not to eat if they're not hungry because they're busy doing other things because of the natural dispersing energy of Vata that we're trying to get grounded. So often Vata types won't eat until 4 p.m. or 8 p.m. Oh my gosh, I haven't eaten all day. All I've done is drank coffee. That is very, very common in Vata type. So to get calories in earlier, that's the discipline, which is so different than the other body types that are trying to space out how long their fasting time is. For Vata types, it's more of no, actually feed yourself regularly and get your feeding times really regular and centered more towards the middle of the day. And in that, you'll have food in your system. So in the center channel of the body, right, you'll actually have, if we just draw that out, let me pull up another page. Right. So for a Vata type, the center channel of the body, that's the center channel. The Mahavaha Shrota parallels it. So that center channel, there's a physical channel. Oops, let me do this in a highlighter. There's a physical channel, but then there's a subtle energy channel, and they're more or less back to back. And to me, this is where Ayurveda is really helpful in a way that we're not going to get here with molecular science. I don't know, maybe for another 20 years to understand. I don't think the nervous system, energy system, and how subtle the biochemistry is here. So in the center channel, so we call that in yoga the Sushumna, right? And that's the center channel that is carrying energy, but it's carrying subtle energy. So the center channel, let me just move stuff around so this makes sense. So the center channel, we're going to say there's 2 of them. So center channel number 1 is the Sushumna. Center channel number 2, they call the Mahavaha Shrota, which is the food carrying channel. And the food carrying channel, so I'll write it in Sanskrit. Maha means great. Vaha, va, vayu, to carry. Shrota is channel. So we've got the Sushumna. The yogis are obsessed about the Sushumna. Anyone who raise your hand if you've heard the word Sushumna? Yeah. Okay, great. So we know in the Sushumna, we've got 2 main energy currents that go from root to crown. Let me draw this thick. They transect at the chakras. I don't know if I have too many chakras in there. 3rd, 4th, I have too many chakras. 5th, 6th, 7th. Okay. So the energy channels here, there's of the one big one, unity loves duality, right? So then we have the 2, we have the Ida and the Pingala, which is the feminine and the masculine. Right? They intersect at chakras, at the main energy centers, which, really look biologically, they're somewhat linked to glands, somewhat linked to endocrine processes, very linked to emotions and shadow issues, and where stuff gets stuck. And by stuff, I mean ama, where that which isn't digested on the subtle mental emotional realm gets stuck. It can also get stuck physically. We know that. But when it gets stuck physically, then we're more in the food carrying channel. So over here, this is more of the elements of air and ether. So we know that Vata types are going to have more access to the Sushumna. Now, over on the food carrying channel, we basically have, pie hole, stomach, intestines, small intestine, if we want to get specific, large intestine, rectum, anus, right? So the in hole and the out hole is like the root and the crown and the root. But it's interestingly kind of reversed in a way, right? Because if we think of chakras, like you want to be grounded in your root chakra, which is like, I am here. That's root chakra. But that's, if we look at the food channel, it starts from the other way. It starts from the top and goes down. Now, because the food channel, is this helpful, you guys? Okay, good. Sometimes I'm like, am I on a tangent or am I on track? So it's helpful for me to know. Okay, so this over here, right, is dominant by earth and water elements and fire. We could say they both have fire. I'll just say the center channel itself is fire, but this has earth, meaning that the physical food that you're eating is tangible. It's got gravity, it's got weight, it's got nutrition, hopefully, and it's got moisture. So it's got water. So over here, Kapha's endomorphs are going to have a lot more access of awareness to the food carrying channel because of its density. Whereas Vata and Pitta types will have more access to the Sushumna because it's dominant by subtle energy rather than physical mass, right? And this is what can create a lot of challenge in autophagy, or what happens after meal spacing is how the body actually goes into deeper, subtler levels of digestion, which give rise to a few things. One, it gives rise to healthy tissue, which in Ayurveda we call dhatus, right? Healthy plasma, healthy red blood cells, healthy muscle tissue, healthy fat tissue, healthy bone tissue, healthy bone marrow, healthy reproductive fluid, healthy then overall immune system, or ojas. Now, with the subtle digestion that happens with autophagy of when we allow digestion to rest and the cells to digest what's within them, is a subtler level of consciousness. And all of a sudden we have an access to a different plane of being that we can't really get to if there's stuff in the food carrying channel constantly. So if this channel is always full of stuff, then physical matter, earth, water, food, or too frequently, we don't get to subtler levels of consciousness. Does that make sense now? Because it's like, oh, because the Sushumna is right there, and the Sushumna requires a certain amount of emptiness and subtlety because its dominant elements are air and ether, right? So we can't feel it if there's too much heavy stuff in the way. Okay, good. So we talked about wind people. Then we talked about why wind people need potentially more focus on the food carrying channel, right? And so they need to actually get the grounding of earth and water in their food carrying channel. Whereas some of the denser body types need to experience the opposite. They need to experience more subtle energy in the subtle energy channel, which we call the Sushumna. And it's dominant by air and ether. I would say they both have fire, right? They both have fire in them. And we can explore that a little bit more specifically, but we know, just the digestive acids and the biles and all that mix the hydrochloric acid and all the secretions that start with the mouth, that are secreted in the stomach, they're secreted in the small intestine, right? That's all little fire packets of digestion that mix with food. But we also know, like anyone who's done yoga seriously knows that there's like some serious fire packets that happen in the form of tapas in the practice of yoga or meditation, where there's like you're generating a friction through your subtle awareness itself. So they both involve fire. I just want to be clear on that. Okay. So let me go back to wind people, and we'll look at these time schedules down here, and then we'll talk a little bit more about autophagy and at the cellular level. So this down here, I'm just saying, like, this is just like a schedule that I find, and it's going to be very individual for people depending on what's going on in your life. Like, this is like relax on the weekend schedule, but like turn it up in the weekday schedule. So the shorter fasting times are on Saturday and Sunday, where it's only a 10-hour fasting window, and longer during the week. And even 14 hours of fasting, at 13 hours, you hit autophagy. So it's, sorry, I think I said it wrong. A 10-hour eating window, a 14-hour fasting window. So at 13 hours, you flip the switch on the cells being able to digest what's within. Whether that's viruses, whether that's bacteria, whether that's undigested emotions, whether that's just stuff floating in the cells that could lead to potential mutations within the cell, et cetera. So earlier in the week, longer fasting times, right? 16-hour fast, 16-hour fast, 18-hour fast, 16-hour fast, 16, 14, 14. Some people would say, well, like, shouldn't Vatas eat at the same time every day? Like, why mix it up? Right? Like, why mix it up? There's really good research that shows that mixing it up, you reach different levels of cellular metabolism. So by always doing the same thing, you're not spurring the body into deeper levels of autophagy, which generates stem cells and growth hormone. So it's good to just in general mix it up. And then, 4 times a year in general, like every season, to do a reset where you go deeper into a fasting mode. But this is just more of like everyday maintenance. So if we go to Pitta types, my sense is, the longer fasts are on the, what am I doing? Are, going to having just a 6-hour eating window twice a week is a very interesting experiment for Pitta types. It enables them often to get out of the hangry mode. A lot of Pitta types in general, because they have strong metabolism, they're metabolic types, right? They're metabolic mesomorphs. So fire is dominant, their energy rises and focuses. They often have a very frequent eating rhythm before they learn Ayurveda and before they start meal spacing. So often and often it feels like they need to feed their fire. And there's often like hangry emotions where they're like, their blood sugar is very imbalanced because they're not actually accessing their fat cells. They're not accessing their fat cells for just run the show. Right. And so I find for a mature, and again, I'm talking about like mature people here. So like mature Pittas to start to enter into like a few 18-6s to feel what that's like. It makes it much easier for them to go into certain days where they go to like a 24 or fast mimicking diet during the seasonal junctures. But in general, like having an easy day on the weekend, a 14-10, which those kind of like binge days where you have a much larger eating window are actually really good. It turns out I think for a few things, like one is emotional cravings, like that you're not always needing to be strict is somehow important to the whole physiology, but it also enables the other fasting days to go deeper. Mindy Peltz talks a lot about that, of like these days that aren't as, that you're not actually going into deeper levels of autophagy as being quite important. But in general, Kapha, Pitta type 16-8 is a really good rule of thumb because you're hitting autophagy at 13 hours and you get 3 hours of it. Okay. Kapha types, again, the Kapha types, that what they want to do is grow wings and fly, right? So they want to grow wings and fly. They want to develop air and ether. And to do that, they need longer and longer fasting times because, as we discussed here, like they need to focus on, how do I open the subtle energy channels? How do I develop more air and ether? What does it feel like to be empty? Empty in the food carrying channel. Because when we're empty, this is an interesting thing. When we're empty in the food carrying channel, we can be very full in the subtle energy carrying channel. And that fullness is a spiritual level of fullness. That's the feeling of like, it's kind of cool. It's like niche prapanchaya, where it's like, I'm totally supported from within. I don't need to take things from outside of myself and gather and bring them towards me. I'm supported from within. And that feeling for Kapha is incredibly liberating because they're like, whoa, I don't need to gather. Like my gathering nature has already done all the work. So I can actually be free and light and fly and be spontaneous and be in the feeling of not being weighed down, not carrying the responsibility. Because Kaphas will often do that, often not from a sense of hardship, but often just from a sense of like, I can do it, so I should do it. This frees them into totally different levels of personality and capacity and experiences that otherwise a Kapha type will not have in their life. They'll be too much in the mundane, too much in the day-to-day responsibilities. All right. Oops. I meant to have that on my Kapha wing person. Okay. Yeah. So now let's talk about, we'll get into the emotion stuff in a minute. Let's talk about what's happening on the cellular level. Where do we want to start? We want to start with what happens with autophagy. Let me make my pen darker. So self-phagy is to eat. So autophagy, it kicks in, it starts at 13 hours. Of not eating. So if we're like the snack, like if we've eaten right before bed or had had a glass of wine, like anything with calories, and then we have something right when we wake up, generally we're not going to access autophagy, which means the cells are not going to eat what's within the cell. They're also not going to eat what's between the cells. So here's a cell, that's a cell, here's another cell, here's another cell. And then the fluid between the cells, all right, this interstitial fluid, the stuff that's between the cells, this is also full of stuff that needs to get digested. And by stuff, we're talking about viruses, we're talking about bacteria, but we're also talking about, in Ayurveda, we're also talking about like excess food particles that will become ama, that are floating through the plasma of the blood and feeding the cells. So there's all this stuff that if we don't digest it, becomes ama. And as it becomes ama, it attracts inflammation because the body's like then sending cytokines being like, this shouldn't be here, which creates flare-ups. Does that make sense? This shouldn't be here. So it's like, well, this shouldn't be here. Well, how do we get rid of it? Well, we just allow the body to do what it does. So there's these molecules called lysosomes. So this is a cell. This is, again, one of the cells. And we're just going to look at this component of the cell, because as far as I can figure out, like this itself, the lysosome itself it's like an Agni packet that's at the cellular level. So the lysosome's job is to digest that which is within the cell and to turn it into something else. And there's something else that it can turn into. And I'm like, I need to do more research on this part. It seems like it can both upcycle and downcycle. So it can turn something into something that can then have more complexity. And it gets this little protein marker that's like a sign of something within the cell that's increasingly complex, but it can also break it down into elemental waste that can be reabsorbed and repurposed within the body. So it's like upcycle, downcycle, recycle. It's got all of those capacities within it. How it does it, it's really interesting about like what's happening in the lysosome is its pH is lower than the blood. So its pH is like 5.5, which is really acidic. And this matches everything we know about Agni from an Ayurvedic perspective. Is like Agni is acidic, it's acid. And by being acid, it breaks stuff down. Now, the way the lysosome, it works in a number of different ways. And that's kind of what they're describing here with these different types of autophagy. One of the ways that one's a little complex. Let me go back up to this one. So one of the ways that it does is there's these things, these other types of intercellular structures called autophagosomes. And these are things that can like surround particles. They join with lysosomes, and lysosomes digest the stuff that the autophagosome has gathered. And it can do that both within the cell. So say there's a virus within the cell, it can like swallow it, and then it merges with lysosomes, and then it dissolves it. So it's the like bear hug, like there's something bad. I'm going to grab it. Now I'm going to inject it with lysosomes. Now it becomes upcycle, downcycle, recycle matter. I think the most important thing to understand with this is that this does not happen without fasting. It just doesn't happen. And when it doesn't happen over time, you've got all this stuff circulating within the cells. And this is where in Ayurveda, they say ama, stuff that shouldn't be there equals ama. Like if you want the simplest definition of ama equals stuff that is getting in the way, right? It shouldn't be there. And because it shouldn't be there, it's toxic and it creates confusion. Why does it create confusion? Because there's all this stuff. I'll give it a gray color, right? Because there's all this stuff that's in the way. So now the cell it can't do what the cell's trying to do. And a lot of what the cell has to do is keep replicating new structures, generating energy and replicating new structures for what the body needs. So cells are in charge of making stuff. They're manufacturing tools, right? And they're not able to manufacture what that organ needs. It's part of a larger system. So there's stuff in the way, stuff in the way, stuff in the way. And it's so crazy how easy the cure is. It's like, oh, fast, don't do something rather than doing something called eating, don't do something called fasting. And then as we fast, it increases the amount of energy we experience because the mitochondria here, these guys, these are the little energy producers in the cells, right? So the energy producers are also creating mitophagy, which is enabling within the mitochondria this eating process to occur. It's generating the structures for the autophagosomes and the autolysosomes and the lysosomes. So the whole thing's totally interconnected. If we don't get one, we don't get the other. We don't get excellent energy production if we're not in autophagy as well. Okay, let's go to a few more pictures. What's kind of cool about this is it shows how the lysosome actually digests the food particles. So you have the food particles over here going into these food vacuoles. This is where like a particle is actually surrounded. And the lysosome is what actually enables this extraction of nutrition for upcycle, downcycle, recycle. So even for this cell to be fed well requires high functioning lysosomal processes. And so if that gets in the way, if there's ama in the way, what happens is what the cell generates is more amagenic. It has more ama as part of it. And when you look at cell mutations, right, like what causes a cell to mutate? If we look at it from this perspective, what enables a cell to mutate is when there's stuff in the way. There's just stuff in the way of clean, clear, efficient processes happening. All right. I just wanted to show you, like, oftentimes in Ayurveda, we talk about Pitta as that which digests. We talk about Agni as that which creates Pitta and as that which digests. And we talk about often Pitta in terms of in the body, in terms of enzymes. And so this is just showing you that lysosomes, which are basically, to me, they're like cell Agni packets, right? That what they're full of is enzymes. They're full of all these different types of enzymes that digest whatever it's trying to break down. You just like chew on the things. They just break the stuff down into stuff that's usable. So if we're having issues with Agni, and the way we know we're having issues with Agni, right, is that digestion isn't what we call in Ayurveda Sama Agni. And Sama Agni, that means Sama is like I mean, sometimes it's translated as perfect. I would say it's more of like, it's all good. Like everything's all good. I'm not attracted to the word perfection too much, unless we look at perfection as a work in progress, but it's more of like, it's all good. Agni is all good, which means you don't notice your digestion. It means you don't notice it, right? Because it's all good. So you're not really paying that much attention to it because the body is now in self-maintenance mode. You can't get into this level of self-maintenance mode without fasting, because you can't get into autophagy, which means you can't get into Agni functioning, which means you're never going to hit all good Agni. So symptoms, right? That's where we have the different types of symptoms of the different types of Agni. So we have in the Vata type, we have Vishama, which means that Vata is active, which means it's going to be going all over the place. It's variable. Now, Vishama Agni means that these lysosomes aren't able to do their job. There's too much gaseous waste in the system. And so usually with Vishama Agni, you get symptoms like you get bloating, you get gas, you get variable Agni, meaning like you're not, your hunger is not functional. It's unpredictable to the point of not being functional. So I'll just say that like there's a hunger not functioning correctly. These are all signs and symptoms. You also usually get variability in feces, right? So you might get constipation, then you might get loose stool, then you might get more and more constipation, then you might get a normal bowel movement. Like things are just all over the place. You might skip a day. Pitta issues, we have Tikshna. And I know you guys already have lessons on this in the course, but I think it's helpful just to see it in this context. Yeah, tie it together. Yeah, okay. So Tikshna Agni is sharp. And this is almost when, I mean, it can happen in I've seen it happen in a few different ways. And it's like, this is to me, there's often a bumpy road for a Pitta Tikshna Agni person to get into autophagy. Because that was the hangry person I was talking about. That's like, I'm hungry, I need to eat every 2 hours. I'm hungry, I need to eat every 2 hours. But the problem with this is it doesn't enable, it's where it gets kind of confusing. It's where Pitta can accumulate in the body, but Agni's not functional. Like what? How does that happen? Why does that happen? It seems like Agni makes Pitta and that digests things. So like, why would that happen? Why would Pitta accumulate and Agni not be functional on a cellular level? Gives pause. So if we look at it, like, what's the person doing? And like, what's out of sync the most? So sometimes, yeah, right. They're not allowing their lysosomes. It's a great way to put it, Sue. Soko. It's like, they're not allowing their lysosomes to actually digest the internal acidity. Like the little packets of stuff flying around in the cells, like these things in the Pitta type with Tikshna, that these are actually Pitta type particles. They're like inflammation packets. It's Pitta out of balance. So it's like more acidic. Why is it that way? Well, if you look at like what Pitta types like, we're all over the excitotoxins, caffeine, dark chocolate, alcohol, right? Stuff that keeps us in a stimulated state. Right. And so it's not like, oh yeah, I need, more, whatever, green smoothies or something like that. Pitta types often like salty chips as well, which will also create an acidic environment. So they'll eat these little things throughout the day, but it'll keep the environment more generating a Pitta type of undigested stuff within the cell. Okay. So for Pitta types to transition into it, often just that, going towards a Pitta type diet that really reduces the acidity in the diet itself, and going towards the intermittent fasting schedule to start to be able to digest some of those Pitta packets within the cells. Very important. Okay, Kapha types go to Manda Agni. Manda equals slow. Remember, all body types are capable of Sama Agni. try to write it legibly. Everyone's capable of sama. Everyone is capable of all good digestion, of not needing to focus on digestion, of not needing to think about digestion. Right? For some people, it's a longer road to get there. But I really have this core belief of like, if you get this right, if you get your eating rhythm right, diet will follow, right? Because you're hungrier and you're more awake. And if you're in that regular rhythm, then you're more awake, then you'll naturally be steering towards seasonal foods. You'll naturally be steered towards that which your body needs, right? Because the channels are clear, they're clean, cells are communicating. This tastes good right now because it's good for replenishing whatever the cells need. Okay, so Manda Agni is slow. What does that look like? It's kind of it's the typical modern human being that's overweight. There's just too much stuff. There's too much stuff in the cell. There's too much stuff between the cells. These are like food particles, right? Here's our food particles, right? They're in the cell, they're outside the cell. They might be very low quality if we're eating, like a lot of Manda Agni right now is very much challenged by the modern food industry. Need I say more about that? I don't think so. We can all use our imagination of what's in the middle of the grocery store, right? Plus overeating, plus eating too frequently. And all of a sudden you've just got slowness in the metabolism because you've got all the stagnation and all the stuff is stuck. So a lot of people today have a Manda Agni issue, regardless of their body type, right? Just because that's where culture's at. Okay. So for Kapha types, Manda Agni, because it's slow, there's simply more to digest. And I think that one of the things here is you could look at these as speeds. So it's like the speed in which something occurs within the body. For Kapha, because they're in a more dense reality, things move slower. Because Vatas are in a less dense reality, right? Things can fly and move really fast. And same thing with Pittas. Things are in a less dense reality and they're more like rocket ships, right? They're very pointed directionally. So because of that, it's like, don't fight the operating speed, cooperate with the operating speed. Let the operating speed work with you. And what will happen is you'll notice you'll actually be able to change operating speeds. You'll get access to all the different operating speeds. And you'll get to choose, like, I want to be slow. Okay, great. I'll cultivate more of that slow energy. How does that happen? It happens because the Sushumna Nadi, you are now able to control the speed within the center channel. Does that make sense? Kind of, a little bit. Yeah. And you're able to push energy down, which is slower. You're able to move energy up, which is faster. All right. So should I talk about the emotions for a second and then we'll go on? Yeah. Okay. So what happens? So when I fast longer, I feel my emotions and memories processing in the empty space. So this is the empty inner space. This is the Sushumna. And it becomes full of that which is processing. Right? So it's in digestion. It's in a digestive phase. So the thing about, I love the word autophagy, right? Because you're actually eating, but you're eating that which has been stored within. And once it's eaten, it's eaten. And what a lot of people experience is that there's like levels and layers to this stuff, right? And that these levels and layers process over time. So sometimes like you're cruising and you're doing your intermittent fasting rhythm and you're good. And then you go into a deeper phase of autophagy. Maybe you do some 24s where you're fasting for 20 hours and you're accessing other levels of stored emotion. Now, the cool thing is like what's on the other side of this is more capacity within the Sushumna, right? Of more of the subtle energies within the Sushumna. So it's not without an end goal or an end game. And often if you think back, and I know for all of you here who've been doing this for a while, it's like you think back to like the maturation of your subtle energy channel even a few years ago or a few decades ago. Right. And you can see like, oh yeah, this goes somewhere. It's directional. It actually has an evolution. It has an evolution to it. So when we're in the emotions that are processing, we can forget that, right? We can just feel like, especially if these emotions are intense, if they're cathartic, meaning they occurred with trauma, and now the trauma is processing. And this is the thing I find with like autophagy in general. Oh, there's this really good quote. Let me find it. Anna emailed me this article today. It's from, I'll put the link in the chat. It's from this really cool ashram that's into urine therapy in India. And its name is Anand Kunj. And so this is like evidence of therapy in urine research. Let me pop it into our chat. What he said about urine therapy, to me, it's like urine therapy and fasting very much go hand in hand. Oh, am I going to be able to find it? I've got to go to the About the Guy page. So that's not the page where I'm trying to. He basically said it's about urine therapy, and which to me is like, if we just bring that to intermittent fasting, like it's always there for you, but it's like especially there when you need it. What did he say? I really want to find this quote. Oh, I'm going to have to find it later. Sorry about that. But it's like the sense of, you can get yourself into a place where, if we look at stored trauma over time or stored emotions over time, you can suppress. And all you have to do is keep filling your food channel and you won't digest the emotions. Right. And you'll layer and layer and layer and layer and layer. Then when you go to digest them, right, it's like they're right there to be digested, right, when you turn your attention to it, right, when you turn autophagy to it. And it'll do it in layers. Now, how deep you go, and this is why I wanted to pull up that quote, how deep you go is it's like, if you're in a disease state and you really want to go deep, and a disease state doesn't just mean a physical disease, right? It could be depression. It could be anxiety attacks, right? Like it could be a number of different things. Like when you go into actually digesting the emotions that are stored within that through autophagy, what'll happen is they'll release. If you can hang out with it, if you can be there with the process of that, and sometimes to me, it like looks like this. It looks like sitting with it. It looks like stretching. It looks like foam rolling. It very much also looks like walking, right? Where you're just like, I'm going to just walk, put one foot forward and walk myself through this, what'll happen is it'll process. And then you might hit a deeper level of it. And it comes in waves and it comes in surges, and like you might hit a deeper level. And often what happens is it's like these addictive cravings come up. Why? Because you don't want to digest whatever's arising. It's too much. It's too intense. And you're too patterned. The person's too patterned. I'm too patterned to looking away from it, right? Rather than going into it. And if you think about how the lysosome, how the Agni packet operates, it goes in, it's so crazy cool. It goes into the toxins and it breaks it up with enzymes. And there's different ways that it does it. Like if you look, it's kind of cool. There's these images. This is a really cool image. Okay, so there's the lysosome with all the little enzymes inside of it. And this is how it's surrounding a bacteria. This is how the cell starts to surround it with a phagosome. And then the lysosome injects the Agni packet. This is what it looks like. Is there's like, say this is a virus. Say this is also an emotional packet. This is like some traumatic emotion that's stored in AMA. It surrounds it. And then the lysosome, it injects its lysosomeness into it. And it becomes a phagolysosome. It like unites with the thing and it breaks it down. And it upcycles, downcycles, recycles. So if we're able to do that on the emotional level and get through it and breathe through it and walk through it and sit with it and be with it. And in that, it's happening. You're doing it. It doesn't feel like you're doing it. It's like in meditation, you're like, am I meditating? Right? Has anyone ever had that experience? I'm like, I'm sitting here. Am I meditating? Right? And it's happening, and it's happening, and it's happening. And all you have to do is be with it. And that to me is like really just be with it, and also move with it. Why move with it? Part of the move with it is you're adding prana, right? You're increasing your breath body. You're increasing the access to oxygen. And just that's going to increase. It's not just oxygen, it's prana. So there's an intelligence to it that allows the cells to have the space to do the work. All right. That's lysosomes for you.